Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. This is Adesoji Speaks Knowledge, a show for seekers of authentic information on Africa past and present. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, an African history scholar with years of study in the bag. For more information on Africa's history and geopolitics, subscribe to Adesoji Speaks Knowledge on YouTube. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Yes, good evening again, and welcome to Adesoji Speaks. And we are live, coming from the United Kingdom, His Majesty's empire, part of His Majesty's empire. I don't know why we're serious. Why we're being unserious now. We don't want to end up in the tower. So, yes, welcome to you, wherever you're hearing us from. Good day, good evening.
Peace.
And
good evening, good morning.
I am Adesoji Iginla, and with me today I've got Azubuike Madujibeya. And as residents of His Majesty's Kingdom, we on the front line of what has transpired in the last couple of weeks. And as a result, we've decided, it's very good protocol for us to have a chat about what indeed we've been experiencing. And I'll give it over to my guest. Please say your first thoughts.
Yes, peace. Good evening, everybody. Many of you who have been watching from near or far events across the United Kingdom, which were precipitated by the sad killing of 3 young children who were in attendance at a Taylor Swift dance party with adults and other children. Ages range between the age of 6 and 9. One of the children herself, a migrant. And that's important to understand because the pouring of perceived rage and anger was to be directed at a migrant who was perceived to have been of Islamic following, Muslim, which turned out not to be true. The man himself, the young boy, 17 years of age, was born and raised in the UK. His parents from Rwanda. He was born in Wales. This event that the children were in attendance took place in Southport in the north-west of England. 10 other people were injured, some critically, and 3 children lost their lives. So the right-wing press, the commentariat, selection of troublemakers, let's call them that, decided to state that this person, that they were even at the vigil for these young children. People from across the country gathered in Southport. Reports from taxi drivers in the local area, ferrying people to and from train stations that wouldn't necessarily be asking for such journeys to particular destinations. So they knew they were not from the local area. At the vigil, after the vigil, violence erupted because people had been whipped into a frenzy to believe that the person who had perpetrated this heinous crime was a Muslim. So fury and ire was directed at the local mosque in Southport. And this seemed to galvanize even more people to behave in a similar manner throughout the rest of the UK in many cities. London was different because of the makeup of the city itself, with the communities of people who are vastly diverse. So that was not a place where this kind of nonsense was going to be tolerated.
Highly unlikely.
So media, together with right-wing politicians, together with Labour politicians, was stoking up real fear. One Labour MP citing people's grievance for
as justification for it.
As justification, refugees coming to the UK and getting housing. Well, if people coming to the UK getting housing, why did you direct them to a hotel where said migrants in this particular vicinity were being sheltered, housed? So these thugs decided to burn the hotel to the ground.
Speaking of burning hotel to the ground, we have a tape. Let's see. Here we go.
Violent clashes have gripped parts of the UK in recent days as protests fuelled by anti-immigrant sentiment rage across communities. But what sparked the riots and why are they spreading? On July 29th, 3 girls were murdered in a knife attack at a Taylor Swift-themed dance workshop in the normally quiet seaside town of Southport, a crime that has shocked the nation. Days later, the suspect, 17-year-old Axel Ruda Cubana, appeared in an English court. Police quickly clarified that the incident was not terrorism-related, adding that Ruda Cubana was born in Britain and that his parents had moved to the UK from Rwanda. Rumours around the suspect's heritage quickly gained traction online, fuelling protests by anti-immigration and anti-Muslim demonstrators, which quickly descended into violence, arson and looting. Cars have been set on fire. False messaging on online platforms has also wrongly identified the suspected killer as a radical Islamist migrant. Police say high-profile figures amplifying these claims have contributed to the public response to the Southport killings. Former leader of the defunct anti-Islam English Defence League, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who is better known as Tommy Robinson, is one of those being blamed by media for spreading misinformation to his many followers on X. Ex-owner Elon Musk has also weighed in. Responding to a post that blamed mass migration and open borders for the disorder in Britain, he wrote, "Civil war is inevitable."
What a clown. What a clown.
But which of the clowns, though?
It's the whole circus. A whole circus. Robinson, Musk, Farage, a smattering of MPs who couldn't know how to comport themselves.
Lee Anderson.
Even calling for Allahu Akbar.
To be
people, and if people say it, they should be arrested. Hallelujah. God is great.
Yeah.
Arrest us. Arrest us.
Yeah, the
this
absurdity.
Is the foolishness. Yeah. The absurdity. And this is precisely what senior Tory MPs have said. The language from the Tory party is divisive. This is I'm reading the Observer from Sunday.
Okay.
On page 4. Senior Tories' divisive language fueled unrest, say party grandees. Some rioters held up slogans emblazoned with the "Stop the Boats," the slogan used by Sunak in the election campaign, designed to show he was tackling illegal channel crossings. Robert Jenrick, one of the Tory leadership frontrunners, drew criticism for saying police should immediately arrest any protesters shouting Allahu Akbar, the Arabic phrase that means God is great. It goes on. I mean, it's just too much to even digest of the nonsense.
So the question,
members are saying, yes, go ahead, sir.
So the question would be, would you, in the spirit of what you've read and seen, have heard, would you describe the country as being racist? And if so, you could draw comparison between a couple of societies in the West and, give us an idea of what sort of racism we're looking at in the UK.
Well, I mean, to say that the UK is racist is farcical, according to the Conservative Party, who commissioned a report. I have a report. Yes, it's farcical, right? It doesn't exist. So I'm looking at 2 reports done by the Runnymede Trust, Creating a Crisis, Immigration, Racism and the 2024 General Election. And the other document is Runnymede and the Amnesty International, United Kingdom, Submission to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. This is to the United Nations. This document was submitted. A rather lengthy document. It talks about the policies and steps and measures that need to be in place to prevent disparities for those people who are marginalized. So to ask if this country is racist, it's really like asking, is the sky blue in the morning?
It could be.
During the daytime.
It could be grey.
It could well be grey. and cloudy. But
the reality is, yes.
The reality is that the legacy of this country, and I think I'll preface that I have some books in my hand that I'll show to people, which probably would anger people. This is not a problem. Truth shouldn't anger people. Denied the ability to have the truth told to you is a problem. So myself and yourself are sitting here in the UK, both speaking English. It's a direct result of imperialism, colonization of Africa.
Facts.
My parents came to this country already speaking English from West Africa. So that was the system already in place in the country we call Nigeria. Those countries that were under the yoke of the British Empire in the Caribbean and wider fields were considered to be part of the Commonwealth. So people in those countries were considered to have British nationality.
Yeah.
And were welcome to this country.
Being part of the British Empire.
They were part of the British Empire. And after the Second World War, those in the Caribbean were invited to come and assist in the rebuilding of this country after it was leveled by their cousin in Germany.
Yeah.
The democratically elected Adolf Hitler. Democratically elected. You must make that point very clear, because it's important for people to understand that your word has been used, weaponized, as if it's a good thing.
And it's also necessary to add that the reason for the war in itself was not so much as difference in values. It was because they lost the First World War, and as a cost of the Versailles Treaty, they had a big chunk of humble pie served to them, in the sense that they lost their colonies in Africa, namely Togo, Cameroon, Namibia, and Tanzania. And as a result, they felt aggrieved and, took matters into their own hand, or they were whipped into a frenzy by the Nazis. And before you know it, they bombed England. Now, bombing England after the war was then won, first they had to rebuild. And to rebuild, they didn't have the manpower. So which meant they had to come back to the colonies. So in inviting the people from the colonies to come back to the United Kingdom to help them, they came thinking they were coming to help the motherland. At least that was the story sold to them back home. They got on a ship, MV Windrush, which happened to be a German ship that was seized but renamed MV Windrush. And they arrived in Tilbury September 9, 1948. And since then, they've been in the eye of the storm.
And we shouldn't forget that over 1 million nationals from India
would also turn up.
As they were of the Commonwealth as well. They themselves having suffered the indignity of partition in 1948. So
twice.
They've gone through their own trauma at that time. This is not to even eclipse or not to bring to light the already fertile ground which was laid before the Windrush generation arrived here from the Caribbean.
Yep.
Professor Lucy Bland wrote a book, Britain's Brown Babies. 2,000 children were born as a result of relationships between African American GIs and English women. How were the GIs treated? They were treated just the same way they were treated in the United States of America. Abominably, dismally. A small passage. On page 16 says, from the moment the British government knew the US troops would be coming to Britain, there was concern in official circles about the consequences of the presence of black GIs. The Home Secretary, Herbert Morrison, for example, was anxious that the procreation of half-caste children, listen to the language, would create a difficult social problem. He and others in the War Cabinet would have preferred no black GIs to be sent at all. These guys are going to war with Adolf Hitler. And he said that they don't want help. So what did they do? The Foreign Secretary, Anthony Eden, argued that the British climate was badly suited to Negroes and suggested that they would be better off in Italy. So the ground has already been set even before this book, we know of instances of what Dr. David Olusoga would call as race riots.
Yeah.
In the summer of 1919, to our surprise, and when I say our surprise, when we hear of 1919, we immediately think of the Red Summer of 1919 in the United States of America. Professor Hakeem Addy's book, he talked about race riots of 1919, and when I read it, I thought he was referring to the United States of America. No, he was referring to the United Kingdom, Glasgow, South Shields, Hull and Salford, London, Liverpool. All of these cities in 1919, Newport, Barry and Cardiff, had race riots, black people fighting for their very existence in this country. At the same time as black people in the United States of America also fighting because a young black boy was killed while swimming in a lake. And he crossed over into the quote-unquote white-only segregated part of a river, which, of course, there's no signage on a river that anybody would be able to discern. So this young boy was hit on the head with a rock. He drowned. The onlookers saw him drown and pointed out who threw the rock. Those people, black people who protested, were themselves arrested for protesting. So the similarities and the experiences of black people, irrespective of where we live, has been marred by violence and brutality against us. And if we go further back, we will see the root cause of all of these things. It's not 10 years old, it's not 20 years or 30 or 100, it's 800, if not a millennia of abuse against Africa and its people. So what we're seeing here in the United Kingdom over the last couple of weeks is a falsehood of grievance born of the fact that people think that there are too many brown-skinned, melanated people arriving on their shores, taking their jobs. You've been to university and got your jobs. I've been to university and got my job. I didn't take anybody's job. I got my own job. You got your own job. There are videos of African people, descendant, showing that they have their own jobs, their own qualifications, not taking them from anybody else. And the bitter irony is this country needs migrants more than they actually want to admit. Most of the Western world has a declining birth population and an increasing and aging population. One of the people affected by the riots last week, a young man, a nurse, a care home assistant, came out to see the site of his car turned upside down and burnt, whilst he was probably caring for some of these people's elderly, saved all of his hard-earned money to buy a car. Now he can't even move around. Doesn't get picked up by the politicians because that's not in their purview to talk about such things. The injustice of this whipping up hysteria for people to feel aggrieved and to let themselves vent that on the streets of cities in the UK.
Speaking of whipping up hysteria, there was one hysteria that was started in the summer of 1968. The Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech.
Yeah.
And he said if Britain was not careful with the flow of immigration, there is bound to be foaming of blood in the streets of Britain. He subsequently died in the 90s, but the people who became somewhat of his disciples are now in the mainstream of politics in the United Kingdom. But before we go to the politicians, I want to harp on the problem of the media. The media in the United Kingdom is a very powerful medium, one born out of the need to be informed because of the war. It has created a siege mentality on the people to the point where anything they see in the media, they believe. The idea of critical thinking, of sieving out what is and what is not tenable has been lost on majority of the population. And again, that is deliberate.
Very much so.
I believe the quote in during the war was "loose tongues cost lives." But funny enough, you see that in the last couple of days to be the case. It was loose tongues. It was people saying things that they ought not to say. So clearly, it's either they've forgotten or they're playing the devil's advocate. Which brings me to the print media is held by three major groups in this country. Murdoch, the one who owns the Telegraph, the Russian who owns the Telegraph, and funny enough, a free paper, the Metro. If you look in front of these publications over the course of a number of years, you will see the amount of bile that has been thrown out there for people to gobble up under the guise of information. Now, so why do I bring that up? What is the role that you think the media played in this particular scenario?
Well, the problem for print media is the industry is dead. To be blunt, a few newspapers hold sway in the number of publications that they print and have purchased it weekly or monthly or however they collect their statistics. But it's not like it used to be before the dawn and the advent of the internet, which has really decimated their business model.
Business model, yep.
So they have to find ways of earning revenue, and that is done by appealing to and stoking the worst auspices of that psyche of people who don't have the ability to withstand the assault, because this is abuse. So Dr. John Henrik Clarke reminds us, if you have an educated people, they won't ask you for power. They will simply take it. So you miseducate and undereducate populations of people for decades, and then you decimate the industries in which these people used to work and providing nothing to replace those heavy industries. So there's the textiles, whether it's the mining, and then you subsequently allow the closure of social outlets, which would have been refuge for so many people. So the children now have nowhere to go. So they become disillusioned. These are government policies of the Tories. Did the Labour do anything better? It was very difficult to not be pandering to the status quo, and the media knows this is the game. So they continue to ferment these headlines that you so articulately pointed out. You could just see the collage of all of these newspapers, as you've sent me this morning. It's just vitriol, literal vitriol from all of these tabloid newspapers. The way that the broadsheets do it is to try to be more sophisticated when they're speaking to a different demographic. This is a Pinot Grigio version of racism, whereas the guys who drink the tabloid newspaper is Ribena racism.
Ribena, yeah. You know.
But it's still racism. So the tabloids have got a lot to answer for in this regard, because although they are regulated, the regulation doesn't say that they can't stoke racial and ethnic tensions.
And then the Freedom of Information Act.
Exactly. So the defamation of people is one of the things that they are not allowed to do. Wantonly abusing people, they're not allowed to do. So they navigate this using clever words in English, which is part of what it does very, very well.
In the land of Shakespeare.
You can say something very, very nasty with a smile on your face.
With
and a blade in your hand.
Polite veneer. Yes. So and speaking of indictment, there is a video I wanted to play with regards to
go ahead.
indicting what's his name? Just watch this.
Which one of them?
Here we go.
Tommy Robinson, leader of the EDL. You can assert until you're blue in the face that these are peaceful protests, but your supporters were heard shouting racist abuse. How do you explain that?
What racist abuse? You know,
I can't say it
we've just been talking
now
about racism.
At this time on television.
We've been talking about racism. I'm from Luton Town. You're talking about racism, okay? There is no racial tensions in the town I come from. When David Cameron says multiculturalism has failed, Sikhism, Hinduism, Jews, they haven't failed to integrate into society. Islam has failed. When we talk against an ideology, if I'm against Scientology, are you going to call me a racist? I oppose the Islamist ideology. That does not make us racist. You can't talk about what we said that was racist because there was nothing said that was racist at the demonstration.
But we've read the quotes in the press. Carla?
I can't count how many times I've read the Daily Mail or some other paper, not that I read these rags, and it says, Pakistani man does blah. When Jimmy Savile is convicted or something comes out about him, is his ethnicity or his religious beliefs put forward as the primary reason for him committing an offence? No. For those who don't know, Baghdad was the intellectual, cultural centre of mathematics and art and science about 1,000 years ago for quite a long time. No one blames Islam for that. So negative people who happen to be Muslim, yes, of course, it's your religion that causes it. But if you pioneer mathematics and science and introduce algebra into Europe and the guitar and coffees and lemons, that's not because you're Muslim.
There's a serious issue. Islam is not integrating, it's not assimilating. Wahhabi, Salafi sects of Islam, OK, they're spreading like a wildfire. What are you doing to combat them? What are you doing to combat Gentile?
Hang on, we condemned...
condemned is not good enough for me,
we spoke against...
But when we deal with racism, rather than dealing with the structural reality and all this nonsense about people are racist because they're frustrated about their life, it's totally classist. What we're saying, only working class people are racist. Do me a favour. Racism was not invented by working class people. It was invented by elite academics through pseudo-scientific nonsense and perpetuated as part of political policy. From the top down, not the bottom up. In fact, if we look back at the history of this country, when there were slave catchers in the streets, people had far more allies in working class parts of London than they did from rich people who were trying to catch them and send them back to the Caribbean. So let's be honest about the history and deal with the bigger problems of structural racism, because then smaller things and smaller frustrations that are breeding this type of nonsense won't be excavated so much. But this is the problem, is we focus on nonsense like this rather than dealing with why a British soldier you've probably never heard of, a gentleman called Christopher Alder, died in 1999 in police custody. There is footage on YouTube that you can see for yourself of him on the floor with his bottom half exposed, with police officers around him making monkey noises over his dead body. You've never heard his name. Why?
Carla.
There you go.
Bringing the facts. And this is the challenge for those of us who are paying attention to be able to articulate exactly in the manner that Carla did when you're faced with people who are only in receipt or possession of some pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. So we could use this metaphor of everybody's building a picture of the truth, but the truth depends on your perspective. It depends on your grounding. Where do you come from? If your pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are upside down, they won't fit very well. But people are led to believe that their pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are accurate. And so Mr. Robinson there, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, actually has no point to make. He turned to the Muslim gentleman to say, what are you doing about the racism and the Islamist extremism? And he said, we confront it. He said, it's not good enough, mate. It's not. Well, what would you have one individual do? This is not an individual problem that can be tackled by one person. It has to be tackled by society. And the society of the United Kingdom doesn't want those things to be tackled because they can weaponize it. And when you weaponize it, you can make money, which is where the media make their bread and butter.
Speaking of the media, I love the fact that he referenced the soldiers,
Yeah.
which is a point that is often overlooked in this country.
Overlooked. Yeah.
When it comes to the question of the history of defeating the Nazis, the role of the Caribbean and African soldiers is underplayed. Deliberately. Which brings me to David Olusoga's book, Black British.
Yeah.
Where he chronicles what they did on the battlefield, what they did in the UK, the kind of racism they experienced in the UK, with Nazis not being allowed to touch them or to use...
Imagine.
Not being allowed to touch them, but to tell a soldier from their side on what to do with regards to how to nurse them to health. And when it came to the march past, the cenotaph, they were put on a boat home. Yeah, and the only soldiers there were captured on camera as being part of the frontier force, were white soldiers from South Africa, white soldiers from New Zealand, and that was it.
Of course.
And so, if you're looking into your history books, and you know everything is documented here, literally anything you want, even to the days of slavery, there is a paper record for it.
Yeah.
So if it's not written down, if it's not documented, it never happened.
Of course.
So that's racism by omission.
By omission. By omission. Which is what they do. They play very, very well at hiding. And Malcolm X always tells us to be wary of the okie doke, being bamboozled, being
Run
led
amok.
astray, run amok. As he famously gave one of his last speeches here in the United Kingdom on the 11th of February 1965 at the London School of Economics. I've mentioned this to you many times before. My father was there as a student studying his PhD, listening to Malcolm speak. And in that speech, Malcolm talks about the media, the press. He says the press will make you believe that those who are oppressing other people are themselves being oppressed.
Oppressed, yeah.
And those who are oppressed are the ones who are doing the oppressing.
The oppressor.
Which is what we see in Gaza. It's fundamentally with the use of language, but deliberately so. And most people, if you're not savvy enough to see this, then you're easy prey to the programming, these headlines that you mentioned, which is what it does. It programs people to think in a particular way, giving people piecemeal information.
Yeah.
And then leads them to jump to conclusions. Those jigsaw pieces that we're discussing, they haven't got all of the pieces. So they fall into the trap of thinking that they have a valid grievance. There is no grievance that they have.
I mean,
not against people who look like me or you or from anybody from Asia or from outside of the European community. They don't have a grievance with African people or Asian people. Their grievance is with their own country, and they don't know how to articulate that. That's their issue.
But also, one has to also take into consideration the fact that we have a class system that is heavily enshrined within this country.
Exactly.
That means what you alluded to there, not knowing how to articulate their concerns, is because they can't quite look this so-called classist in the face, but they can look at you because in their minds, they're better than you.
That's all they've been sold. Therefore, they don't need to do any self-reflection. And this is what the people who are in the upper echelons, in the political class, the media class, they have told them, don't worry, you could be poor. At least you're not like them. And this is the problem for many of those people who can't see past that racial categorization of black and white. It becomes very, very murky ground to navigate. Social constructs, these terminologies, interwoven with other ethnic usages of the word black for people in America, because that's their ethnic categorization. Negroes, colored, Black Americans, African Americans. We know one person who's got members of his family that have all designations in his own family. His father was called colored. His great-grandparents are called Negroes. He himself is a Black American. His children are African American, or the other way around. All the different demographic identifiers. So there's no consistency. And it's always because other people want to put you in a box. So they can say, you're in that group of people. No, we're not all a hegemonic group. We're not. So these issues are long-standing, and it requires courage to tackle them. And what we're doing here today is trying to uncover just a small portion of that issue with the small text that we have at our disposal.
There is actually, there is, I would also like to, since we're talking about racism in the UK, one cannot but mention the victims of some of their barbarity. And I'll just mention a couple of names. 1959, Kelso Cochrane. Kelso Cochrane was a Trinidadian carpenter who was coming home from work.
in Notting Hill.
In Notting Hill was set upon by racist yobs and killed.
Yeah.
His killing will set in motion the Notting Hill Carnival,
Claudia Jones.
which was, Claudia Jones, who from the United States, herself exiled from the United States. One must not forget Stephen Lawrence.
Don't gloss over Claudia Jones. She was jailed. The crime she committed, having left Trinidad and Tobago herself as an 8-year-old because of hardship there, economic migrant to Harlem in New York, educationally brilliant, no surprise. She was a member of the Communist Party USA. What was her crime? Helping Black Americans register to vote.
Okay. Then we cannot but mention Stephen Lawrence.
Stephen Lawrence, yes.
Who was going home, waiting at a bus stop.
With his friend Dwayne
Brooks. And again, split up. He was set upon, killed, stabbed. The worst part was his family was then investigated by the police to see if they can dig up dirt in order to,
tarnish his name,
tarnish his image, because they can't quite believe that a kid like that would not be involved in anything. Yeah. So they needed an excuse not to do something.
Yeah, they did, and that caused the breakup of the marriage between Doreen Lawrence and her husband Neville Lawrence.
Yep.
Doreen Lawrence became an ardent anti-racism campaigner, and the way that these structural social systems work is they become very flexible. They absorbed Mrs. Lawrence into the social fabric by giving her a peerage in the House of Lords,
but making sure
so
she can talk from the inside, but she can't talk from the outside.
Exactly. And her husband, ex-husband, found himself back in his home country.
In the Caribbean. Yeah.
In the Caribbean. A news report recently my friend sent me said that Mrs. Lawrence, it's not relevant to this conversation, but they still have grievance. They're very bitter about what this country has done. Of
course. Something that would resonate with the Americans. His gravesite was attacked repeatedly, just like Emmett Till's. His body had to be exhumed, taken over to the Caribbean for it to rest there. It shows the level of barbarity of people you're dealing with. And then
his body has subsequently been brought back.
Yeah, no, it is going to be brought back.
Right.
It's not brought back yet. It's going to be brought back.
Okay.
Then there is who can forget that 30th of July 2015, Anthony Walker in Liverpool, the kid who was mag. I don't even want to go into. There is, but one that often that misses the mark, and I don't know why it is, maybe because of where it happened, was David Olawale in Leeds, 1969. He was hounded to death by police officers. And that would, some would say, the first time two police officers will be sent to jail for causing the death of, quote unquote, a black man. And then the 13 kids, 1985.
The New Cross,
1983, then subsequent one took his life because having played with 13 kids, all your friends are gone and you're the only one.
Trauma.
The trauma was just too much. Poor kid. And he eventually took his life and they became 14. Why? Because the system let them down. They were in their home, having a party. Somebody lit up a cocktail, threw it into the house, no escape. Windrush. I said Windrush. Before Windrush, Grenfell Towers.
Grenfell Tower. This one is so egregious for people who remember the site of the World Trade Center towers after the two planes crashed into them. You saw people jumping. Grenfell Tower sits in the richest borough
of London.
In Europe.
Yeah, in Europe, sorry. Europe.
It is the richest borough in Europe, Kensington and Chelsea. The makeup of London in terms of housing, there is no segregation amongst rich people living in that quarter and then less affluent people. Everything is conjoined because this is how the aristocrats used to be serviced by poor people who would live nearby so they could be serviced. This is why you have all these social housings in the middle of wealthy areas. Grenfell Tower, a tower block, much like the projects in the United States of America, was a bit of an eyesore. So the council saw it fit to cover the building with
they were prodded by the rich folk. The council was prodded by the rich folk to make it much more sightly.
Much more sightly.
Exactly.
So what did they do? They bought cladding to cover the building. This cladding was bought from the United States of America,
where it had been
banned from being used on buildings more than 5 or 6 or 7 stories. This building was 18 or 21 stories.
18 if you're counting the loft. Yeah.
So of course the firefighters could not get to the top floor with their ladders because they just don't go that high. And people were throwing their children out of the windows to people below. And so 76 people perished. Is that correct?
Official number.
Official, thank you. Official number. Because I was working in that area of southwest London at the time in another building. And from the 23rd floor of the building that I was working in, the following morning, I could see the building still smouldering. A terrible sight. I could only imagine what it was like on the night when that building was burning.
The fact that we had to watch it live on TV.
Yes, we had to.
The public lynching of 76 people on TV. Sears in the memories.
Yeah.
And then the Windrush Scandal.
We don't even know how to even broach this topic because
it's still ongoing.
It's still ongoing.
That's the worst part.
Scheme. This is the worst part of it, yes. That people were invited to come to the United Kingdom to assist in the rebuilding of this country. As they landed in the docks or at the airports, had to present their landing tickets. Their landing cards to immigration officers, who then sent them to the Home Office. Their children, many of them 3, 4, 5 years of age,
were listed on the landing cards.
Fast forward to Theresa May as Home Secretary under David Cameron. Hostile environment. We need to get rid of these migrants. Of course, she didn't mean those migrants. So what did they do, the Home Office? Allegedly, they said they ran out of storage space. So they destroyed all of those landing cards of those Windrush generation of people and then promptly invited those people and their descendants to prove when they arrived in the UK, knowing full well that they didn't have the proof, and then started to deport many of them who had worked here. One of them worked in the Home Office, in Parliament, as a dinner lady, serving them food. Prove when you came here.
I've been here 50, 60 years.
You've been here 50 or 60 years, paying tax. And then they have the temerity to tell everybody that there's no structural racism in this country. Why did they not return these tickets, landing cards, to the people and their descendants if they had run out of space? Digitization could have saved those things in the cloud. They chose the worst, the most egregious option, destroy them, and then insult the people by asking them to prove when they themselves have destroyed the proof. I don't know what kind of structural racism you could classify this as, but it's just so egregious. It really is egregious. And many of the people, some of them have passed away trying to get their compensation. Some of them have never known any other country.
That is, so it's...
So we're just scratching the surface.
The surface, that's the thing.
We're just scratching the surface.
That's the thing. We've not even gone into the educational sector.
My God, education is subnormal. ESN. That's for another discussion.
Exactly. We've not even done the medical side.
goodness.
We've not done, okay, we'll do the sports side. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's, where do you look? Where do you look?
Well,
there is another part that is often glossed over. The issue of slavery. The transatlantic slavery. Let me play you this. Sorry. Here we go.
Slavery was not genocide. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many damn blacks in Africa or in Britain, would there? You know, an awful lot of them survived. What again? There's no point in arguing against globalization or Western civilization. They are all products of it. We are all products of it. The honest teaching of the British Empire is to say, quite simply, it is the first key stage of world globalization. It's probably the most important moment in human history, and it is still with us. Its consequences are still on, and generally speaking, in most ways, actually fruitful.
I don't mean to trigger.
It was prime time. This is the point. Linking, joining some dots. Why would the media always turn to certain figures?
To reaffirm the status quo.
To reaffirm the status quo and to reinforce the ignorance. David Starkey, doctor as he's dubbed, a historian of the ilk of those who would write the history of African people as inconsequential.
Yep.
We have no history. We don't know how to do anything. We didn't build anything. We've made no contribution to civilization. Ask Socrates where he went to study. And for how long? Where did the Romans go? For so long.
No, he will tell you that you have no civilization. And so, if that is the person they will have gone to in Oxford, thankfully he's been excused, but you know, the cobwebs are still in there. This is just the one that has seen the light of day, you know. But these are the people that reaffirm that level of ignorance, and he's lauded, he's feted, you know. I mean, I remember when I first of all said to him, who is this chappie on TV?
Why is he always there?
My brother will say, listen, it's their country. Just let them be. Like, but this guy is chatting nonsense.
He's talking nonsense.
But eventually, the tape I just played now was the one that finally got him off the screen. And this happened during the Black Lives Matter protests. You remember that period when we were all sat at home, everybody was on Zoom, and before you know it, somebody put a camera in his face. Boom. He just let the cat out of the bag. These damn blacks. They're still
always
very
protesting. Always protesting. But
yeah.
Why did we protest?
Yeah.
I think we were in lockdown, right? We were told, don't go outside.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Did we not just see someone get their necks knelt on for 10 minutes until his body expired? Mr. George Perry Floyd in Minnesota. Did his family not flee from the West into Minnesota to avoid the very thing that he subsequently died from? Abuse. George Perry Floyd.
And that is the problem we have when it comes to the UK. This notion that everything is the way it is and it's always been the way it is. And who are you to change it? Why are you changing it?
To change it?
You know, which brings me back to the issue of symbols. Winston Churchill. There are books, you know, fallacies and all sorts of, fairy tales that has been written about this guy. And everybody outside of these shows know who this chappie is. The irony for those who are pushing a certain narrative about him is he was callous enough to even write about himself, how, you know, egregious he is. I mean, I'll give you one of his quotes, which was when he was informed of the Bengali famine. And he said, well, I have nothing to say to them. It's their fault for breeding like rats. They're such beastly people.
Rabbits. I think he said rabbits.
No, beastly rats. He didn't say rabbits. He said rats, vermin.
Oh.
Yeah. He said, you're being nice. He said vermin. He said rats.
I've been too nice.
He said it's their fault for breeding like rats. After all, they're beastly people. He can care less. And this is when the stock they were taking from the Bengali was not necessary. You could have left it there and they would have fed themselves. Yeah. But you extracted that stuff from them. And one of the things about the United Kingdom that would at some point, which I doubt, but obviously one has to point out the hypocrisy of the entire thing. Here's a country that prides itself, its Englishness, everything, we're British. You do not belong. If you do not toe the line, you cannot be part of us. Professor Kehinde Andrews, in his book, Psychosis of Whiteness, said there are two people we have to be afraid of. Not just the racist, but those that look like us. Yes. Because they're constantly championing. I mean, I can mention a few names, but let's just leave them be. Yeah, exactly. Let's just leave them be and not, one was the guy who chaired that silly committee who said there was no racism in the United Kingdom. And then there is this. Sorry, I have to trigger you again.
It's okay, I've seen them all.
To be honest, the English flag isn't just a symbol of racism. It may be the primary symbol of racism in this country because of how it's been adopted and co-opted by the far right. In my mum's generation, it was keep Britain white and being chased down the street, being called a monkey. In my generation, it was a National Front telling me to go home. And now you've got the EDL, BNP, and all these other groups, right?
When I grew up, I remember massive street parties for the Queen's, anniversaries, for example, Silver Jubilee and so on, where everyone would bring out their St George's flag with great pride about their country. So it's had a double meaning. It may have been misappropriated by people who have nefarious reasons to do so. But fundamentally, it remains the flag of this country.
If I see that flag on a pub and I'm going, and it's not the football time, that means no go. That means no go today is the same way it did 10 years ago.
All right,
in many ways, it's like the Confederate flag. It's like, that's our version.
Well, it's an interesting comparison, except that Nigel Farage, the problem with this is St George is our patron saint. I mean, he is the English patron saint.
We've been through all this before. Back in the 1970s, you'll remember that the National Front adopted the Union Jack as their symbol. And everybody said, we mustn't fly the Union Jack, it's a symbol of racism. And actually, collectively, people said, two fingers up to that, we are going to fly the flag, we will take it back for ourselves. And you know what? The Union Jack is now a global symbol. You see kids in America wearing T-shirts with Union Jacks on it. It's exactly the same with this flag. If there is a feeling in some communities, and you say that, and I'm not disbelieving you, but if there is that feeling, well, let's claim it back. I mean, look, I'm wearing those today. Nothing wrong with that, is there?
What do you mean? The fact that St George isn't even English, Nigel.
Yeah, I know.
He was born in Greece.
Apparently never even came to England.
But it's
in
a symbol,
part that is now part of Turkey.
Nigel Farage, it's a great question for you. Why would you want a foreigner who's never been near...
I didn't choose
never
it.
Been
I didn't choose it. I was just born into this.
Why is St George your hero?
Well, he is a symbol, isn't he, of standing up.
He's Turkish.
And on a daily basis, it's played. Two, I think you have to understand what Englishness is, and we have to have a proper conversation.
What do you think it is?
Well, there's some good parts, but there's also some very bad parts, right? You look at colonialism, look at slavery, look at these things, and you can't just say, well, let's wrap up the flag and say it's all great. There's a reason why the far right picked this flag, and it's not.
And what do you think that is?
Because we feel cut out of it.
We had the same arguments over the Union Jack 40 years ago.
Let's turn to the Windrush Scandal, OK? Here you have a lot of black people from the Caribbean who were brought here in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
Now being told they're not English.
Now being told, actually, they're not English.
It's an administrative...
Doesn't matter how many flags they wave. But part of the problem...
It's a huge admin cock.
Or is it institutionally racist?
No, of course it's not.
It's not, really?
Of course
not.
Are you sure?
We've
got millions of people have settled in this country. We've got a few thousand... We don't know yet, but a few thousand cases here. This is a pure... administrative error. And frankly,
but it was
it happened...
But it was driven by a philosophy of creating a hostile environment.
Well, was it?
For illegal immigration.
Well, actually, the cards were destroyed in 2009 when a Labour government...
No, I don't dispute that.
All right,
I'm not actually saying it's a Tory problem, but there's no doubt that when Theresa May became Home Secretary, she doubled, trebled, quadrupled down on this and ran a very, very tough hard line with the van saying go home.
I remember.
And so on.
The Conservatives were running scared of UKIP. That's my
Should we have vans showing around communities?
No, I actually said at the time, I think this is over the top and wrong. Of course we want to stop illegal immigration and we need to do a lot more. There's roughly 150 people a day still getting in lorries across, through the Channel Tunnel. So there is work to do. But the Windrush thing, the idea that this is some deliberate policy that's been against black people, frankly, is not.
No, you can't say
it's an admin
error. But this is the point. It's not an admin error. When you create this hostile environment, this is what happens. And I guarantee a lot of those people who have been deported or lost their jobs, they're probably feel the most English out of everybody.
Right.
Yes.
It didn't do them any good, did it? Because they've been...
You know what?
All these
well, how many have been deported?
We don't know the numbers, which is terrible, actually. This is not a new thing. This has been happening for years.
You can bet your life it's hardly anyone.
This has been going on for years.
This has been going on for years, and it is
There you go.
Nigel Farage, gaslighter in chief.
Exactly. And then we're supposed to kowtow to this nonsense.
The irony of using a flag which is of origin from Genoa. The white flag with the red cross.
Yeah.
Because a powerful family would afford shipping companies protection by waving that flag.
Yep.
So the English flag is not even English. And the saint is not English. The irony.
It's
foreigners shouldn't be here.
It's funny. It's funny, but not sad.
It's completely sad.
Those people lost their livelihood, and their lives simply because they bought into the fact that they're part and parcel of something.
Yeah.
And, that thing has now cost them, what can I say?
Dignity.
Yeah.
Human dignity.
So, which brings us to the question of, what do we do?
Well, for people like yourself and myself who've got capacity, and I know even here on your platform this evening, as we're discussing, just talking, maybe a few people joined us in the audience. We greet them, thank them for joining with us.
Mm-hmm.
We need to do as our ancestors have been telling us, is to study. And in doing that study, we see these patterns of mistreatment. And when we see these patterns, then we have to inform other people. Study without the action is of no benefit. All the books that I have, I didn't show this one. This is another youthful memoir from another Nigerian author. This ship, the Jesus of Lubeck, bought as a gift, as many parents would do, buy a car for their 18-year-old child. This was bought by King Henry VIII for his daughter, Queen Elizabeth. People need to know this history, even if it pains them, because they don't know, and in not knowing, you will always be ignorant.
Mm.
And then you will use your ignorance as if you know everything. And this is dangerous in a society where you can't use opinion, as Dr. Carr teaches us, to outweigh knowledge by fact or knowledge by faith. You have knowledge by opinion. Everybody's opinion isn't equal.
True.
If it isn't equal. Those who have studied, scholarly study, deep study,
mm-hmm.
gone into whichever institution of academic learning to be able to really deep dive into these topics and bring that knowledge to the masses, their opinion carries a bit more weight than the ordinary person.
Mm.
So we need to avail ourselves of their knowledge and their wisdom, as we do, sitting in their company. One of my favourite historians, as you know, is Dr. Gerald Horne, who's writing copious amount of books faster than I can read them. And doing what you're doing here is to discuss these issues on a global level, so that people understand where we sit and where we stand. If we can't completely articulate the illness, applying a plaster onto the wound isn't going to solve the issue. So we must understand what is the issue. And there are many. And there's denial, as Professor Kehinde Andrews talks about in his book, The Psychosis of Whiteness.
Whiteness, yeah.
For many people in the United Kingdom who don't know the history of this country, it's easy to deny. Why should I pay for slaves? I never owned any slaves. Delhi has a chronology of events from 1452 to 1833. 1452 was the papal bull by King Nicholas V, issued to King Alfonso II of Portugal. And it ends with 1833, the abolition of slavery by the British government, in which they use 40% of their GDP to compensate slaveholders from the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And taxpayers, including yourself and myself, paid
until
2015. So if you paid any tax in this country...
Up to 2015, you were still paid.
You still paid for people who held slaves, enslaved African people. So people need to know this history. So how do we tackle this monumental ignorance? It's not possible for an individual to do that, but we do each one teach one.
Yeah.
And then we continue to build from the ground up and then share the knowledge and encourage people to share their knowledge and their wisdom and to hold somebody else's hand and share that knowledge. And we keep building until everybody knows what they need to know.
Facts.
And then from that, we can then start to ask and address real other pressing issues that are facing everybody, namely the climate, the environment, the pollution. Yeah. These are real issues that, the racism detracts us. It wastes our time when we have real pressing issues that are not going to wait for us to solve these issues of, well, you're black and you're white. Mother Earth doesn't care about that. Climate change doesn't care about that.
Speaking of racism, I would like to end on this note. I'll take a quote from Toni Morrison, and she wrote, "The function and the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over and over again your reasons for being."
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
And on that reflective note, I would like to thank our Eagle of God, Azubuike Madujibeya. Thank you for coming through.
Always a pleasure, my brother.
The pleasure is all mine. And to our audience, it's a great thank you for joining us. And do like, share, subscribe, share the good news, and point people in this direction. You can download the audio version of this podcast, and that will be in the morning. You guys can have it. You can then share. And also tell people to go there and download it so that at least, even if they can't see it and watch an hour of videos, they can listen in their own spare time while they're driving, commuting, cycling, running, and doing all the good stuff. But until next week, it is me, Adesoji Iginla, and
myself, Azubuike Madujibeya. Peace.
Be good to yourselves, and good night.
Good night.
I hope you found this week's episode informative. Join us next week on Adesoji Speaks Knowledge as we continue to help you reframe the narrative about the African continent, past and present, by providing you with accurate information to give you a true and clearer picture of events as it pertains to Africa. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share. Thank you.